have a wonderful pleasure now of inviting Hana to present our paper, Processed Foods and Plant-Based Diet, Wonderful.
If I had to choose one sport to play for the rest of my life, it would be tennis. There's nothing like the feeling of that ball hitting the racket and sailing over the net. But I had a lot of balls just hit the net. You know that feeling when the ball just drops on your own side? Well, that's how it feels sometimes with our patients. We serve them the best nutrition advice, and we see that it's just hitting the net. Well, but with just a little bit more flexibility and control, sometimes we can bring our point across. And so how do we score points in patient tennis? Are all processed foods equally bad? Are they all a foe? Or can they sometimes become a friend? So let's review the literature. Let's look at the mechanisms and also define the research needs. Let's start with reviewing some of the studies. About 25 to 60% of calories on a Western diet come from processed foods. And Bernard already reviewed the NOVA classification and the 4 categories. Let me just point out a few aspects that will be useful in the rest of my presentation. So the class number 1 contains a lot of foods that we recommend to our patients, but should meat and dairy be on the same level as the whole grains and legumes and fruits and vegetables. Class number 2 added salt and sugar and butter and oil. Note that there is no differentiation between fat quality. There's also no differentiation in terms of quantity. So let's say you make popcorn. So once you add these ingredients from class number 2 to the foods from class number 1, they become automatically class number 3. So let's say you have air-popped popcorn and you sprinkle a little bit of salt. That's now class number 3 food. And it's in the same category or on the same level as if you drench it in butter. So, should we probably differentiate a little bit better in this classification? Okay, class number 3, processed foods. Canned vegetables and fruit on the same level as cheese and canned meat. Bread on the same level. And class number 4, hamburgers and sodas on the same level as cookies or ice cream. Can you make a healthy ice cream or cookies at home, using healthy ingredients? Absolutely, right? So while the NOVA classification is useful in showing us the process, and showing us how the foods are being changed and their matrix is being changed during the process of factory processing, it's not really differentiating between the foods in terms of the origin of foods. So Bernard already presented his study. So just to briefly summarize the findings, every 10% increase in ultra-processed food consumption was associated with a 15% increase in the risk of type 2 diabetes. The consumption of ultra-processed foods was also associated with a lower intake of whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. So is it eating more of the processed foods, or is it eating less of these whole grains and fruits and vegetables, or is it both? Findings from 3 large US cohorts from Frank Hu's group with a follow-up for more than 30 years. People who were eating more ultra-processed foods ate also more calories, had a higher BMI, had a higher risk of hypertension and high cholesterol, had a lower diet quality, and were less physically active. And comparing the extremes quintiles, the risk of type 2 diabetes was 56% higher in the group with the highest ultra-processed food consumption compared with the lowest. Each additional serving a day was associated with a 5% increased risk of diabetes. And interestingly, the authors also looked at the different ultra-processed food groups and found some significant differences. So while animal-based products were associated with an increased risk of type 2 diabetes, so were sodas, and so were also sauces and spreads and condiments. There were some groups that turned out to be protective against diabetes, and those included ultra-processed breads and cereals, and also packaged sweet snacks, packaged savory snacks, and yogurt. So not all ultra-processed foods are created equal. There seem to be some significant differences, and some may be actually protective against diabetes. Well, let's review a few more studies if these findings are consistent. A study looking at ultra-processed foods and multi-morbidity, an analysis from the EPIC study. Each standard deviation increment in ultra-processed foods was corresponding to about 260 grams per day. And they were looking at cancer, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes, and also at multi-morbidity, combining all of these three outcomes. And for total ultra-processed food consumption, the risk of type 2 diabetes was significantly increased. Now, let's look at the different food groups. Animal-based products, a significant increase, and sodas, a significant increase. Sauces, spreads, and condiments, a significant increase. Now, again, breads and cereals were protective. So it looks like the ultra-processed animal foods and the sodas are the main drivers of these observed associations. So the breads and cereals were protective. We know that whole grains reduce mortality, both all-cause mortality, cardiovascular mortality, and cancer mortality. And yet only 2% of Americans consume the recommended 3 servings a day of whole grains. So there is a huge gap between the recommendations for consumption of whole grains and the reality. And if we just add another classification that will prevent people from eating breads and cereals, we may actually not serve them well. That's why this paper is calling for excluding whole grains from the NOVA ultra-processed classification. What about legumes? A similar story. Legumes reduce mortality by 6%. A systematic review and meta-analysis of 24 prospective studies has shown that substituting processed meat with legumes reduces all-cause mortality by 9% and type 2 diabetes incidence by 12%. So how do we compare the hamburger and the plant-based burger? Is there any difference? Technically, they're in the same NOVA classification class, number 4. Should there be any difference at all? Well, a crossover randomized trial, 8 weeks of eating at least 2 servings a day of either meat-based products or plant-based meat products that were provided in overweight people showed a decrease in TMAO, a decrease in body weight, and a decrease in LDL cholesterol on the plant-based products. So there's clearly a physiologic difference. So should plant-based meats and the fake plant-based products be on the same level as the animal products? Well, I'll let you decide. When I was beating my head against the classification, I felt like this boy. Dear math, please grow up and solve your own problems. I'm tired of solving them for you. That's how it sometimes feels. It's more complex. The NOVA classification seems to be too simplistic and doesn't differentiate the foods as it should. What are the mechanisms that drive the ultra-processed food consumption and the association with type 2 diabetes? Is body weight the mechanism? So if people eat more ultra-processed foods, they gain weight, and that's why they get diabetes more likely. There's an analysis from the EPIC study showing a clear difference between the extreme consumption of ultra-processed foods, but the difference is fairly small, 0.12 kilograms per 5 years. So that's super small. Kevin Hall's study has been already shown here. It was a metabolic ward study in 20 weight-stable adults. And the increase in caloric intake and body weight was partly due to the higher saturated fat content in the ultra-processed foods. This study showed that one of the mechanisms why people gain more weight and may be likely to develop diabetes is because they just consume energy more quickly. Many of the ultra-processed foods are more packed with energy, so in a shorter period of time, you're able to eat more calories. In contrast with broccoli, try to eat as many calories from broccoli as from pizza. Just impossible. Another mechanism is food additives. There's just so many additives that are supposed to enhance taste and color and need to make the foods shelf stable. Number 3 mechanism is packaging. Bisphenol A has been suggested as one of the drivers of obesity and type 2 diabetes. A recent randomized clinical trial that was placebo-controlled showed that only a 4-day exposure to bisphenol A decreased insulin sensitivity. It's present in cans and in plastics, but there are many products that are labeled as BPA free. This is in contrast to many natural foods where the natural packaging is actually the most nutrient dense and the healthiest. And so things are also changing. There are some packaging methods that are edible, like this rice paper and some other edible options. The number 4 mechanism why ultra-processed foods increase body weight and are associated with type 2 diabetes are the advanced glycation end products. You've probably heard that you need to be careful about how you prepare your food, right? The dry heat, if you're grilling your meat, then much more of the advanced glycation products are being formed compared with stewing or broiling. Let me show you a few numbers. So if you microwave your chicken, the AGE content doubles. If you grill your chicken, the AGEs increase 6 times. But let's look at also some of the plant foods. Potatoes and apple, they're much, much lower. We're talking about several hundred times lower compared with chicken. So what would happen if we gave people only a vegan diet that influence the AGEs that they're eating? So that's a study that I was presenting 2 years ago here, compared with a control group that didn't change their diet at all. On the vegan diet, people reduced their dietary AGEs by 79%. And this decrease in dietary AGEs was also correlated with changes in body weight, even after adjusting for caloric intake. So these findings just clearly suggest that there's, some ultra-processed foods that are much worse than others, that we should differentiate better between these. So moving on to part number 3 in our presentation, what are the research needs in terms of ultra-processed foods? Well, if breads and cereals are protective, and if it's the animal products that are driving the association between the ultra-processed food consumption and diabetes, should we perhaps differentiate between those? Is it possible that if we give people a vegan diet, we would probably be able to differentiate better? So that's exactly what we did. We had 244 overweight people, and we randomly assigned them to follow either a low-fat vegan diet that consisted of fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes, or stay on their usual diet for 16 weeks. We analyzed their diet records at baseline and at week 16 using the nutrition data system for research. And we used the NOVA classification. But in each group, we also divided up the group into the animal-based products and the plant-based products. And Laura served as our independent reviewer, blinded to the group assignment. We used ANOVA for repeated measures. And the vegan group lost 14 pounds on average, 6.4 kilograms in 16 weeks on average, compared with the control group. Now let's look at the animal food consumption. In category number 1, there was a significant decrease, of course, in the vegan group compared to the So there was a significant decrease in category number 2 and 3. No significant difference between the groups in category number 4. Now, interestingly, we looked at whether the animal product consumption correlated with changes in body weight in each category. And we found out that category number 1, 2, and 3, all of these that changed between the groups, all of them were correlated positively with changes in body weight. That means the less of them people ate, the more they were losing weight. Moving on to the plant foods, category number 1, a significant increase on the vegan diet, no significant difference in the other groups. And this significant increase in category number 1 correlated negatively with changes in body weight. So that means the more of these foods, the more people were losing weight. While category number 2, that was basically the plant oils, correlated positively. So that means the less oil, the less fat, the less added fat, the more weight loss. So it turns out that regardless of the level of processing, all the animal foods were a foe in terms of weight management for our people. And when we gave people the advice to follow a vegan diet, the minimally processed foods increased the most. It was the legumes and fruits and whole grains and vegetables. But I also showed you some findings that support the use of some even processed foods from the plant kingdom in prevention and treatment of diabetes. So it looks like we need a NOVA 2.0 system that will differentiate between the foods better. And it's no coincidence that this particular conference is taking place at the NOVA Park, where they don't only have the vegan line of products, but they also serve the best plant-based meals. So how do we score points in patience tennis? All we need to do is keep serving plant foods. Thank you for your attention.